Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this creative brain training workshop. My name is Diego Irigoyen. I'm the Education and Collections Coordinator here at RAFFMA, and I am also the author and the author of the book Creative Brain Training. So I'm going to tell you a little bit to start off what Creative Brain Training is and how I got started with this program, what I've done with it, and how I think it has benefited me and benefited others as well. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can get started today with your own creative brain training. So I'm going to share my screen here for a little PowerPoint presentation. I'll try to make this part brief because I know most of you probably want to jump right into learning how to do some creative brain training. So creative brain training is a program that I developed while I was a student at Cal State San Bernardino back in 2015 and well, as early as 14, but I've been practicing these exercises since about 2012. And around 2015, 14, I kind of started to put these things together, mainly because I was experiencing some really great benefits. One of the big ones was an increase in attention span. So the exercises that I'll talk about today increased my attention span and allowed me to perform much better in my classes at the time. It also had a big impact on my memory. It made it easier to remember things from my presentations in class or lectures, and I was able to pass a lot more tests with higher scores studying less than I was before. And so these kinds of exercises really stimulated my memory centers in the brain and allowed me to perform better in classes. And then the really big one is that it actually elevated my mood. These exercises made me feel happier. And sometimes in the midst of them, you kind of get this strange euphoric feeling. And some of you might experience some of this today, and we'll talk a little bit about why we experience these kinds of sensations. But the program's made up of three basic parts. The first is conscious breathing. The second is ambidextrous development. And then the last is just making art, kind of taking the two first ones and using them towards the production of art. So this whole program came about because in 2011, I was doing really bad in school, really bad. And if I did not improve, I would be kicked out of school. So I started looking for stuff that could improve my performance in school. Around that time, I was dealing with a bunch of things in my personal life that brought me a lot of anxiety. And so the first thing I came across was meditation. And I learned a bunch of different styles of meditation, but they all had something in common, and that was utilizing the breath. And so I began to develop my own breathing exercises that I would do on a daily basis, that I would do throughout the day. I would do sitting in class. That helped me a lot. And then the next thing that really began to transform my life was this ambidextrous development. So learning to write with the opposite hand, learning to write in mirror image with the opposite hand, learning to juggle, learning to do some other weird exercises that increased the dexterity of my non-dominant hand, brushing my teeth with the opposite hand, eating with the opposite hand, all that kind of stuff began to change my mental acuity. And then the last thing that I found very transformative, very relaxing, and very beneficial is just making art, having some downtime. And so I started to integrate the breathing and the ambidexterity into making work as well. And then after having great success from 2012 to about 2014, I became really interested in whether or not these kinds of exercises would work for someone else. And in doing that, I managed to get some funding and started teaching a class at Cal State San Bernardino on this subject. And I taught students how to learn to write with the opposite hand, how to breathe, how to be more aware of their breath, and then at the end we made art and had fun doing it. So that experience translated into the next 4 years of teaching, both at Cal State San Bernardino and about 3 years teaching at the federal prisons through the Prison Art Collective. So in the prisons was where I really began to see that this is a transferable experience. Other people can experience similar things to what I experienced. And, you know, I had a lot of success with those students there. And that's what really motivated me to write a book. So the book has all of the information on how I was at my low point in 2011 and got out of that, and then went on to teach people. And I explain all the tenets in thorough detail. So you can learn everything in more detail from the book that you're going to hear today. Okay, so why does this stuff work? And the first thing I'd like to talk about is the mammalian brain and how it is in relation to the body, how the nervous system is in relation to the body. And so this diagram that we're looking at here is a depiction of what is known as the homunculus theory. This is kind of like 101 neurology. The brain has a nervous system that goes throughout the body and connects to the body. And it's what allows you to move your fingers, to feel through your fingers, and the nervous system's all throughout the body. So you can do this everywhere, right? However, there are more resources dedicated to different parts of the body, depending on how important they may be to the brain. So for example, in this depiction of a man with an oversized head and oversized hands, what we're looking at is a depiction of the motor homunculus. So this is all the neural real estate that is dedicated to the hands and to the mouth. So speaking is a very complicated thing. There are many different kinds of languages, and so a lot of neural real estate goes to the mouth, goes to the vocal box, the tongue, the movement of the lips, all of this, so that we can speak. Now, the next area that you'll see is the hands are extremely large. So we have a huge amount of neural real estate that is devoted to the hands. This is part of the reason why when you get a paper cut, it can hurt so much. So using this knowledge, ambidextrous development can have a really high impact on the neural system because so much real estate is actually devoted to the movement of the hands. So when we're young, we learn to write with our dominant hand, and we only kind of develop one side of the body in that sense. And it's kind of interesting that writing is one of these things that we devote only one side to. Like if you get thrown in the pool, they don't tell you to. Okay, I'm sorry about that. We spent the whole morning setting all this up, and of course now we have technical difficulties, so I apologize. Can you guys hear me okay? Am I back? Okay, sorry about that. So we're gonna learn a little bit about how to take advantage of this untapped resource, the non-dominant hand, and all of the neural connections that are attached to the hand, and how we can really accelerate some neural growth through ambidextrous development. Now, all of this is possible because of something known as neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability and the neural ability to change itself. So through ambidextrous development, you can stimulate neurogenesis, which is the birth of new brain cells, synaptogenesis, which is the birth and strengthening of synapses in the brain. And one of the most important ones is we stimulate something called myelination, which is the increase in white matter in the brain. And myelin is a coating around our neural pathways. It serves as an insulator for neurotransmitters. So the thickening of that myelin improves neural functioning in the brain. Okay, we're not doing too bad on time. I'm not talking too much. Okay, so here I have an example of some mirror image writing. I have found that the mirror image cursive writing, and I'll talk about why cursive, is one of the most effective ways to begin developing ambidexterity. Handwriting in general is a very complicated type of movement. Cursive is even more complicated than your simple print. So by embracing cursive handwriting, especially with the non-dominant hand, you are really stressing the neural centers of the brain and forcing them to adapt and grow in response to this sort of activity. And I have found that it is the best way to build a foundation of motor coordination on the non-dominant side. This image here is an example of one of my students' work. He's originally a left-handed individual, and he had beautiful cursive already. He learned a long time ago, and it was his primary form of writing. So he always wrote in cursive. So he kind of took to it better than others might. However, anyone can do this, I guarantee you. So at the top, you have an example of his left-handed writing. His right-handed writing forward. We have an example of his right-handed writing in mirror image. Oh, excuse me, that's his left hand there. And then here at the bottom, we have his normal writing. So today, the individual who wrote this, his name is Tim Herons. He can write with both the left and right hand, forward, backwards, and he can even write upside down. So this is an exercise for the long haul. It's not something that you're going to become good at overnight. And this is probably one of the most frustrating things for people, is that they start off and immediately it is not what they might expect. So this is an example of the type of time it takes to see progress in this type of exercise. But I think it's worth it in the long haul. So the first little image here, May 2012, that was the first time I ever decided to write with my left hand in mirror image. In August of 2012, so just a few months later, it had changed to what you see in that second image. About 9 months later or 8 months later, in the following year, my left hand had improved quite dramatically, and we started to see some real consistency in the writing. And almost 2 years later, you can see the writing again changed. And if I will show you the sample that I have here on the table. You will see again how my writing has changed since 2014. It's something that constantly evolves, mainly because I spend too much time doing it. So let me show you again. Here we have the writing on the table. Oh, did it not switch over? Okay, here we go. So this is what my writing looks like, and I wrote this back in June. So again, it's changed quite dramatically since 2014, and my right-handed writing here at the bottom. Okay, so that's kind of like the meat and potatoes of what creative brain training is. And there's a lot of neurology that other people have studied, and I've done some presentations where I've delved further into the neurology of all this, but a lot of it isn't as interesting as actually doing it yourself. And I think that's one of the things about creative brain training that make it so accessible, is that we can just hop in and do it ourselves and experience the results of it for ourselves without having to know any of the neurology or necessarily know what's taking place inside of the brain. So we're gonna start off with a blank sheet of paper. So if you don't already have a blank sheet of paper, you can go ahead and get one. And you will need a pen or marker of some kind. I'm gonna use this bold marker to get started. And we're gonna go through some exercises that are gonna get you started in feeling what it's like to write in mirror image. Now, one of the reasons why we choose to write in mirror image with the left hand rather than learning to write forward with the left hand. Again, if anyone has any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to raise your hand or write them in the chat and I will respond to them. So why do we write mirror image? Traditional writing goes from right to left across the page, right? This is normal. Goes from right to left. Now, one of the reasons left-handers struggle with forward writing is that this from left to right motion is more naturally executed by the right hand because it pulls away from the body. We pull away from the body when we write with the right hand in the traditional way. Now, left-handers, they can't do this. If I were to rotate my paper, there's only one way that I can do it where I write away from the body, and it's like this, if I were to write this way. So one of the reasons why we write mirror image with the left hand is because it's actually easier to write in this direction with the left hand. There is one really famous individual who used to write in mirror image. Does anybody know who this individual is? He was an artist, very famous. He went by the name Leonardo da Vinci, and he would write in mirror image in his notebooks. And for a long time, nobody knew, and we still don't definitively know why he did this. Some people like to guess that maybe Leonardo da Vinci was trying to keep secrets in his journal, and that's why he wrote in mirror image. But I think that he actually did it because it was easier to write backwards with the left hand. Leonardo da Vinci was ambidextrous. He could paint and write and draw with either hand. And it seems like this was pretty common in the Renaissance times. Artists were maybe even trained to learn with both hands from a young age. Michelangelo was famously reported for painting the Sistine Chapel with either hand. Since he was standing on scaffolding and painting the ceiling, he would just change hands when his arm got tired. So it may be that there were a lot of artists who actually learned to do this back in the day. So that's why we write backwards, because it's a little bit more natural of a movement to pull across the page rather than trying to push across the page with the left hand. So, and in this way, we can actually learn from either hand. You can see how the right hand does it and transfer that to the left hand. Okay, exercises. Let's jump into some exercises. So the first thing I'm gonna have you guys do is you're gonna take your pen and you're gonna hold it in your hand with your right hand, or your dominant hand, maybe the left hand, and you're gonna look at how do you hold the pen. Everyone holds the pen slightly differently. I tend to hold it as you see here. This is what's known as a tripod grip. So 3 fingers kind of triangulate around the pen and hold it stable in that way. And once you've kind of analyzed how you hold the pen, I want you to then pass the pen on to your opposite hand and try to recreate the way in which you hold the pen. It's not going to feel comfortable right away, or it's not going to feel natural, I should say. It takes a little bit of time before the left hand becomes accustomed to what you're asking of it. So once you've switched the pen a couple times and you've noticed, okay, this is how I hold it, this is what feels comfortable, I want you to then do this exercise. With your dominant hand, do loops across your page, just like this. And pay attention to where the movement is coming from. Is it coming from your fingers? Is it coming from your wrist? Is it your whole arm that wants to move? And then once you reach the end of the page, switch hands, and going the opposite direction now, we're going to do loops just as we did. And again, try to focus on where the movement is coming from. Is it the fingers that are moving? Is it the wrist? Is it a combination of them? Or maybe it's the whole arm that wants to move. Pay attention to the movement. So this is one of the main exercises you can start with to begin developing some comfort with the left hand. This is going to feel awkward at first. It's going to feel like you're 5 years old again. And that's one of my favorite things about it, is that it kind of takes me back to a place of being like a child, and I can laugh about how poor I am at these exercises. And then as time passes and you continue to practice, you get to see some growth. So the first exercise is loops. The next exercise is one that's going to translate into some cursive writing a little bit later, but we're going to create waves. And what I mean by that is we're going to create the silhouette of a wave shape. It's going to look like a series of C's. See how that looks like a wave? Now, this is a little bit more of a complicated movement than loops. But this is going to help us down the line with some of the more challenging letters to switch into mirror image. So again, once you reach the end with your dominant hand, switch hands, and now backwards across the page, create the same waves. So this is the second exercise that you can do. And this is going to begin to increase the comfort level. Again, these kinds of exercises don't really, you don't see results right over a short period of time. It takes time to really see the change in your writing and also to feel the change as well. Some of you might get hot doing this and begin to sweat even. One of the reasons is that because the neural network has so many resources in our hands, and we are forcing now our non-dominant hand to do some very complicated exercises such as these, very complicated motor dexterity. It takes up a lot of energy and it can generate heat in the body. I like to think of this as a workout sometimes. Some people say that they get a tingly sensation on their brain when they do these exercises. Okay, now these two are kind of the introductory exercises. I used to teach this course over a series of 10 weeks, and we'd go through the movement slowly in those 10 weeks. And at the end of session 1, these exercises we use them to combine them together. So you do loops and waves together. And this way, again, we're complicating the movement. And I always take breaks before I get to the end of the page. I don't go the whole line because words don't usually take up a whole page. They average between, 4 to 7 letters. So now we're complicating the movement again by combining the C and the L. So we've already learned how to write 2 letters in mirror image. And one thing that I always encourage people to do is if they're struggling, switch hands. If your left hand gets tired, switch hands. If your right hand gets tired, switch hands. And in this way, we can study and learn from our own hand. How is it that our dominant hand can do these exercises so easily, but our non-dominant hand can't? What minute differences in form are making it this much easier? When we switch hands, you'll notice that I am switching my paper around. The angle of my paper is changing every time I switch hands. Is the angle of yours changing? Are you accommodating the left hand? When I write with my right hand, my left hand holds the paper for me. When I write with my left hand, is the right hand holding the paper? There's a collaboration that's constantly going on between the 2 hands. And a lot of times, the left hand gets shortchanged because the right hand doesn't know how to help. So we have to consciously get the right hand involved. Hold the paper for yourself. Now, I also tilt my body slightly to the right when I write with the right hand. Or excuse me, I angle it slightly to the left, this way. So am I switching my body position when I switch hands? Am I now changing the angle of my body in relation to the paper? So all these little changes in form will make it easier for you. And in this way, I actually taught myself to do this by simply observing how the right hand did it and also how the left hand helped the right hand do it. So that collaboration, what's going on between the 2 hands. And in that way, you can learn from yourself as well. You can teach yourself to do this as well as I have taught myself to do this. So C and L, right? So these are some introductory exercises for you to start building up the motor dexterity of the non-dominant hand. So, because this is a 1-hour session, I would like to show you guys how it is that you can write your name in mirror image today. So I'm going to share with you something that I call the mirror technique. I'll just abbreviate technique. So if you can grab a new blank sheet of paper, or you can flip over the one you were just working on. And what we're going to do with this one is we're going to fold it in half so that we have a crease down the center of our page, just like you see here. And hopefully you do better than I did. So we have a crease down the center of our page. Okay. So this technique uses this center line as a reference line. We're going to imagine that this center line is now the edge of our paper. So if this is the edge of my paper, I would write this direction with the right hand. This is the traditional way. So I'm going to go ahead and just write my name. So what we're going to learn to do here is we're going to break letters down so that we can better visualize these letters in mirror image. Flipping letters around is sometimes one of the more challenging aspects of this exercise, but this is a technique that I use that does not utilize tracing. One way to learn to do this is by tracing, but I think it's more important for you to learn how to visualize how to do this. So I don't encourage tracing. So that we're gonna go letter by letter in my name. And I encourage you to go letter by letter in your name as well. So starting with the letter D, I'm gonna kind of do it oversized so I can see it and you can see it really nice. I'm gonna start up here. I travel down in this direction. I loop in this direction. Loop up. And then I kind of go out. Right? So I've broken down the directions in which the letter travels. Now I'm going to use the reference line to better understand the directions here. I travel downwards at an angle towards the reference line. I curve towards it and then away from the reference line. And then I begin to curve upwards and away. And then I curve towards the reference line, out. So towards it and out. So those are the directions that I travel for the letter D. So now in mirror image, the only directions that change when doing this is I will still travel up and down in the same ways that is shown here, but I will travel towards the reference line, which is now the opposite direction. So for example, this first line, I travel down and towards the reference line, and then I loop towards it and away. So to start the first two strokes, or the first two movements involved in the letter D, I start and I move down towards the reference line, and then I curve towards it and away. So now I've just recreated this part of the letter D in mirror image. The second part, I move up and diagonally away from the reference line, and then I loop towards it and again away. So now I will curve up and away from the reference line, and then I curve towards it and out. So now we have the letter D here in mirror image. Can you see how this is a mirror of that letter D? So by breaking down the form and really understanding the directions it moves through, I was able to mirror image the letter D. I hope that makes sense for everyone. Now I'm going to show you another trick here. This is a little trick that I use when people are really struggling with a certain letter. And capital D can be one of the more complicated letters. So if you hold two pens in your hand, and with your dominant hand, you just write the letter that you know, say the first letter of your name, or perhaps the letter D. If you just write it in the air like you're conducting an orchestra, and you allow for your opposite hand to follow you, as if you're conducting the orchestra, you will see that the left hand, or your non-dominant hand, just follows the movements of the dominant hand. And by following the movements, it's actually writing the letter in mirror image. It's doing the opposite of the dominant hand. So you just wave your hands in the air like you're a conductor, and you write the letter that you're looking to do in the air, and you will see that the opposite hand will just follow the movement of the dominant hand. So this is a trick that the brain kind of, I'm not entirely sure, I've heard that maybe mirror neurons are involved in this. We replicate things. If you're with your best friend, maybe you guys have similar characteristics. And so maybe these are the mirror neurons working together and creating symmetry on their own. So if you just move the hands together, they will move in unison, and the opposite hand will do the mirror version of what you're doing with the dominant hand. It's kind of a funny trick. It's an interesting little brain trick. So if you're ever struggling with a letter, This is one way to do it. And you can pay really close attention to what the left hand is doing, or the non-dominant hand, so that you can see and actually do it by itself. Okay, next letter. The letter I, nice and simple, just up, down, and then away from the reference line. So here, up, down, and away. And then the letter E is just like the letter L. It's just a little loop. Now the letter G, this is one of the more complicated letters, but that wave exercise that we did earlier, would we go up, down the same line, and then we just curl all the way around instead of leaving it open. So here's the wave exercise, and then the G just closes it. And then this makes the D, the A, the Q. This rotation can sometimes be one of the harder rotations for people. That's why the letter C in the wave exercise can be so beneficial early on. So then here we have a G. And then the last letter, again, utilizing the C wave, O, and we close it rather than leaving it open. So up, down the same line, and around. Okay, so those are the 5 letters of my name. And then the challenge is, once you've kind of broke down each letter, you have to connect them all together. So here in mirror image, we have my name, Diego. Now, if you've gotten this far and if you've written your name in mirror image, you might be thinking, oh man, I am bad at this. Some people are really good out the gate, but a lot of people think, oh wow, I am just not very good at this. And one of the reasons why we think that early on in learning to write mirror image is because we can't actually read it. Your brain hasn't learned how to read the mirror image writing. It actually took me longer to learn to read my own mirror image writing than it took me to learn to write it. I was writing it within a day, but it took me at least a month before I could easily read my own writing in mirror image. So one of the things as I tell people to do is actually hold your paper to the light and look at it from the back side. Or put it in a mirror, look at it in the mirror. Or one thing that you can do is put a light under your paper so that it shines through. Now I'm using a marker here and that bleeds through the paper. And so when I flip the paper over, you can see here's my mirror image Diego. And if you look at your writing in mirror image, I bet you will look better than you think it does. So go ahead, show it up to a mirror or shine a light behind the paper and flip it over. Or you can just hold it up to the light or something. And you will see that your mirror image writing is a little bit better than you had expected. So that's one of the challenges early on with the mirror writing is that your brain can't actually understand what the writing is. And it's having a hard time deciphering the letters. And that makes you think that it's not as good as it actually is. So this is the mirror writing. If you guys would feel comfortable, I'd love to see some of your writing samples. So if you want to, you can turn on your camera, I believe, and you can show me in your camera your mirror writing. I'd love to see that. Okay, let's see if I can blow up the screen. Hey, that looks pretty good. Okay, yeah, nice. Moises, that's very good. Awesome, thank you for sharing that. So this exercise here, how does it serve us practically? How is it going to become something that's going to benefit me in the long run? Now, I imagine that you guys have experienced how challenging this can be. So the way I found this exercise served me is that it actually improved my attention span. Doing this kind of exercise, writing with the opposite hand in mirror image, and doing more than just drills, actually trying to express thought, journal about your day, write about questions, maybe rewrite your notes, write about what you learned in class. Doing these kinds of exercises and combined with the mirror writing is extremely stimulating for the brain. It is tiring. It's going to work the brain out. And the way I found that this translated is it improved my attention span. So I spent a short amount of time writing every day with the left hand, and I was pretty diligent about it. I would sit down, I set a timer. Sometimes I'd write 20 minutes. Sometimes I'd write as long as an hour with the left hand. And when I started going back to classes shortly after starting to do these exercises, I could now all of a sudden sit in a class and pay attention throughout the whole duration of that class. And I was able to retain more information from that class. And I was also taking notes with my right hand in cursive now. So I had abandoned printing altogether and I was just writing in cursive. And I found that my attention span went through the roof. In 2011, when I was on the verge of getting kicked out and I was trying my best to improve my grades, I was falling asleep in class. I wasn't able to remember what was being said in class or taught in class. And I was struggling mainly because of my attention span. And this handwriting exercise just transformed that ability in me. I was now able to remember what was going on. I was able to pay attention for 2 hours without falter. So that's one of the ways I have found that this exercise translates most practically into your day-to-day life. The other thing that I have found is that if you write in cursive, in mirror image, about your day, you write about your thoughts, you write about what you learned, maybe you write about a presentation you have to give, it will actually make you a better speaker. There's something about writing physically by hand and speaking. There's this interesting connection. You have this writer's voice that is slightly different than what you use when you're actually speaking. And I feel like this ability in communication is really practical and something that can be developed through mirror image writing. Now, there is one more interesting thing in regards to the ambidextrous training. And there's this term called intermanual transfer of skill learning. It's kind of a long term, intermanual transfer of skill learning. And this is a phenomenon that has been documented since the 1940s. And basically what happens is when you begin to train your non-dominant hand in a certain task, the dominant hand will improve at a faster rate. And this has been seen in sports. So when you are training, say if you want to be a pitcher, for example, in baseball, if you trained yourself to throw with the left hand simultaneously with the right hand, your dominant hand will improve at a quicker rate. And this is something that I experienced through the writing. As I learned to write with the left hand, my right-handed handwriting improved at a quick rate. And I wasn't even trying to do this. So this is kind of an interesting phenomenon that happens when you begin to train yourself ambidexterity. Most recently, this has been noticed with surgeons. So when left-handed surgeons are being trained on techniques that require right-handed dominance, they find that those surgeons have an overall higher proficiency because they're being forced to use their non-dominant side. So this is kind of an interesting area where this phenomena has been documented. Okay, so that's the mirror image writing. It's not as complicated as it seems, and it can be a lot of fun if you decide to get into it. So for the last 10 minutes here, I want to talk to you guys about breathing. And I want to share a little bit about the breathing exercises that I recommend in my book and how you can easily begin to implement them in your day-to-day life. Now, one of the main things that I learned early in 2011 and 2012 when I was struggling with anxiety and I was underperforming in my classes is that the vagus nerve, which exists in the lower gut, this vagus nerve also regulates anxiety. All of this is dictated by the breath. If your breathing is improper, if it's off, your vagus nerve won't be able to do its job correctly, and you may suffer from more anxiety than you need to. One of the things that we can do to immediately improve our breathing is to be conscious of the way the stomach moves when we breathe. Maybe some of you have heard of this phrase, suck it in. So you suck and you pull your stomach inward. You know, maybe you do it to squeeze by somebody on a chair or something, right? Now, when you breathe inward, the way your stomach is supposed to move when you breathe inward is it's actually supposed to push out. Your lungs are intended to fill with oxygen and push your diaphragm and your stomach outwards when you breathe. So when we breathe in, we're supposed to fill our belly. Some say fill your belly with air. You're not actually filling your stomach with air, but you're breathing into your lungs, you're filling your lungs with air, and your stomach is being pushed out as you breathe in. And your stomach moves outward. And when you exhale, that is when your stomach is supposed to pull inwards as you breathe all the air out. So this is something that you can be conscious of all the time. Maybe you're sitting at your desk and you're just paying attention to how you breathe. Is your stomach expanding as you inhale? Is it collapsing as you exhale? And you can do this consciously. This is a technique that they use in meditation. It's something that gets you in tune with your breath. It's something that forces you to be present with your breath at this time. And this is one of the exercises that I think absolutely saved my life in those 4 years of 2011, 2012. Learning to breathe properly and also having something to focus on when you feel like the world is collapsing around you, right? When you have some sort of anxiety attack, focus on the breath, to breathe inward, allow for your stomach to expand, and as you exhale, allow your stomach to collapse. It takes a little getting used to, but once you get used to it, you'll see how it begins to feel natural. So that's a great breathing exercise to get started with and to be aware of as far as our breath is concerned. Now, another exercise that I used early on in the conscious breathing exercises, I attached a thought to my breath. So for example, I used to say to myself all the time, inhale peace, exhale love. And I just say this mentally to myself, inhale peace, exhale love. Again, it's another way to intentionally tie the ongoing internal narrative of the mind with something physical to bring you into the present, to not get stuck in some thoughts that bring you anxiety. Inhale peace, exhale love. And you can modify that so that it suits your needs. I remember when I first started going into the federal prisons and teaching, I was rather nervous to do so. And so I would inhale confidence, exhale respect. And so you can modify that to whatever suits your needs or whatever you feel comfortable with. So that's a great exercise to find yourself present with your breath. Now, another exercise that I used in breathing, and this was more a part of the breathing routine that I do on a daily basis, it's a meditative routine, is I would breathe in through the nose and exhale through the mouth. And I would do this 5 times. Big inhales through the nose and full exhales through the mouth. And I'll do that about 5 times. It's a good way to warm up for a meditative session if you're into meditation. There's another exercise that is promoted at a lot of yoga sessions and a lot of meditation sessions that involve some sort of breathing, and that's alternative nostril breathing. So if you breathe in through the left nostril, exhale through the right, inhale through the right, exhale through the left, and you alternate in that way. And as far as how this affects you, some people say conceptually that it's a way to clean the lungs, that you circulate air through the lungs. It doesn't actually work that way biologically, but I have found that it actually helps with any sort of congestion you might have in the morning. So if you find yourself with congestion in the morning, this is something that you can do to clear out the nasal pathways. And I recommend, if you're into breathing and would like to learn more about how the breath affects you, a book called The Breath by James Nestor. He talks about nose breathing and how it is far more efficient to breathe through the nose and better for you in the long term to breathe through the nose than it is to breathe through the mouth. So if you're somebody who breathes through the mouth, you might want to consider switching over to breathing through the nose. And again, the book Breath by James Nestor would be a great resource for you. One of the last things that I'd like to share as far as the breath is concerned, counting your breath is an excellent way to, again, tie the ongoing internal narrative to the physical present breath. Counting the exhale, for example, 1, 2, and that way you can just kind of quiet the internal narrative and focus it on something that is very easy and familiar to you, which is counting. So that is all I have for the breath today. We have about 4 minutes left. If anybody would like to make any comments or ask any questions, I'd like to invite you to do so. I'd love to hear back from some of you, and if you have any suggestions or interesting resources related to this, I'd love to hear about that too. But other than that, thank you so much for attending this creative brain training workshop. I hope it's what you expected, and I hope that you got some value out of it. And I really appreciate everyone attending today. So thank you.